I'm Helen. I'm 74 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one holding things together. The anchor, they called me. The steady hand. Now, sitting in my living room, the afternoon sun warm on my face, I traced the faded edges of an old photograph. It was of a younger me, maybe in my late 20s, standing beside my late husband, Thomas, on a beach somewhere. We'd talked about traveling the world, seeing all those places I'd only read about in books. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Thomas passed away unexpectedly when I was in my late 50s, leaving me with 2 grown children, Jake and a daughter who had since moved overseas, and a house that felt too big and too quiet. My retirement savings, once earmarked for those grand adventures, slowly became a different kind of fund, a family fund. Jake, my son, is 50 now, and his wife, Karen, is 48. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Sarah, who is 32 and has her own life now, and Liam, who is 10. My daughter, Sarah's mother, lives in Australia with her family, so I don't see them often. It's mostly Jake, Karen, and Liam that I'm involved with day to day. I remember a dinner just a few weeks ago. It was at that new Italian place Karen had been raving about. The bill came, and I watched as Jake and Karen exchanged a quick glance. I knew the look. It was the same look I'd seen countless times over the years. Without a word, I reached for my purse. "Thanks for covering again, Mom," Jake said, a casual wave of his hand. He didn't even look up from his phone. Karen just smiled, a little too brightly, and started talking about the dessert menu. No, thank you, no offer to split it, just an expectation. It stung, but I was used to it. It was always easier to just pay than to make a fuss. That was just one dinner. It was the constant stream of things. Every family gathering, my kitchen was the command center. Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays. I was the one cooking, baking, organizing. My hands, gnarled with age, kneaded dough and chopped vegetables for hours, while everyone else relaxed. My back ached, but I told myself it was for them, for my family. It was love, wasn't it? And the children. Liam, my grandson, is a sweet boy, full of energy. Sarah, my granddaughter, is a bright spark, always asking about my day. But she lives further away now, busy with her own career. So, it's mostly Liam. Karen and Jake work demanding jobs, or so they say, and I'm always available. "Grandma, can you pick up Liam from school?" "Grandma, we have a late meeting. Can you watch Liam for a few hours?" It wasn't just a favor. It was an expectation. My calendar was their calendar. My time was their time. Just last Tuesday, I had plans to finally tackle the overgrown rose bushes in the garden, something I'd been putting off for weeks. My phone rang. It was Karen. "Helen, darling, so glad I caught you." Her voice was always so cheerful, almost saccharine. "Jake and I have a last-minute work thing tonight. Liam needs to be picked up from soccer practice at 5, and then he's got homework. You know how it is. Would you mind terribly?" I paused, looking out at the thorny tangle of roses. "Oh, Karen, I was actually hoping to get some gardening done today." "Oh, well, it's just for a few hours, sweetie. Liam adores you, you know. He'd be so disappointed if you couldn't make it. And we'd be absolutely lost without you." She laughed, a light, airy sound that made my stomach clench. "Of course, Karen," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'll be there." The rose bushes remained untamed. Liam was happy, though, and that was supposed to be enough. Later that week, I was tidying up after another Sunday lunch at my house. a lunch I'd cooked, of course. Jake and Karen were in the living room, their voices carrying through the open door. I was in the kitchen, stacking plates, pretending not to listen. "So, for the weekend trip next month," Karen was saying, her voice a little lower now, conspiratorial, "we'll need someone for Liam. Do you think Grandma would be willing to watch him? Like always?" Jake mumbled something I couldn't quite catch, but Karen's response was clear. "Oh, she won't mind. She loves spending time with him. And it saves us a fortune on a sitter, doesn't it?" She giggled. The clatter of a plate in my hand was louder than I intended. It wasn't a question of if I'd be willing. It was a statement of when. My heart, which I thought had grown accustomed to these little jabs, sank a little further. Like always. The words echoed in my mind, planting a cold, hard seed of doubt. Was that all I was now? The like-always person? The unpaid help? The one who wouldn't mind because she never did? The sun, which had felt so warm moments before, now seemed to cast long, chilling shadows across my living room. The like-always comment from Karen had been a dull ache in my chest for the past 2 weeks. It hadn't gone away. If anything, it had festered, making me hyper-aware of every interaction, every casual dismissal. This past Sunday, it was another one of our family lunches at my house. I'd spent the morning preparing a roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole, all their favorites. The aroma filled the house, a comforting scent that usually brought a sense of warmth, but today it felt heavy. When everyone arrived, the usual chaos ensued. Jake and Karen swept in, Liam trailing behind them, already demanding juice. Sarah, my granddaughter, arrived a little later, bringing a bottle of wine and a bright smile. She's always been different, more observant. She gave me a hug that felt genuine, not just a perfunctory pat. "Grandma, this smells incredible as always," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old warmth, but then it was time to eat. I'd set the large dining table for the adults and a smaller, round table in the corner of the living room for Liam and any of his friends who might show up. Today, it was just Liam. I carried the platter of chicken to the main table, then went back for the potatoes. When I returned, Jake was already settling into the head of the table, Karen beside him, and Sarah across. There was no space left, or rather, no space offered. "Mom, why don't you sit with Liam today?" Karen suggested, gesturing vaguely towards the small table. "He'd love the company, wouldn't you, sweetie?" Liam, engrossed in a video game on his tablet, grunted noncommittally. My heart sank. I cooked the entire meal, and now I was being relegated to the kids' table. Again. It wasn't the first time, but after Karen's earlier comment, it felt like a deliberate act. I swallowed the lump in my throat and managed a tight smile. "Of course," I said, picking up my plate and a glass of water. I sat down opposite Liam, who barely registered my presence. From my vantage point, I could see the main table. Jake was laughing loudly at something Karen said, his head thrown back. Sarah was engaged in a conversation with them, her gestures animated. They looked like a picture-perfect family, a tableau of happiness I was watching from the sidelines. I tried to join in, leaning forward slightly when there was a lull. "So, Sarah, how's that new project at work going?" I asked, trying to sound interested. Sarah turned, a polite smile on her face. "Oh, it's good, Grandma. A lot of coding, you know. We're building out a new API for a client in the fintech sector. I nodded, though most of it went over my head. That sounds complicated. Jake chimed in from the main table, not even looking at me. She's just Grandma, Sarah. She doesn't mind. You wouldn't understand all that tech jargon, Mom, would you? He chuckled and Karen joined in, a light, dismissive sound. The words, "She's just Grandma," echoed in my ears. Just Grandma, not Helen, the person who cooked their meals, cleaned their messes, and paid their bills. Just a generic title, an interchangeable role. Liam, looking up from his tablet for a moment, pointed at my plate. "Grandma, why do you eat so slow? Are your teeth old?" He giggled, a child's innocent cruelty. Jake, still focused on his conversation with Karen, heard it. He didn't correct Liam. Instead, he just chuckled again. "She's just Grandma, Liam. She doesn't mind." The words were a casual dismissal, a reinforcement of Liam's observation. It was as if my feelings, my very presence, were irrelevant. I tried to engage again later when they were discussing a new streaming series everyone was watching. "I saw a preview for that," I offered. "It looked quite interesting." Karen waved a hand. "Oh, Helen, you wouldn't understand. It's a bit too modern, too fast-paced for you. All those twists and turns. You'd probably get confused." Jake nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Mom, it's not like those old shows you used to watch. This is more current." The conversation flowed around me, over me, as if I were a piece of furniture in the room. They talked about their jobs, their friends, their upcoming vacation plans, the very vacation plans I suspected I'd be funding, or at least facilitating by watching Liam. They laughed, they shared inside jokes, they made plans, all while I sat a mere few feet away, invisible. A cold, hard knot began to form in my stomach. It wasn't just about the kids' table or the dismissive comments. It was about the pattern, the constant undercurrent of being an afterthought, a utility. Their affection, I realized, with a sickening lurch, wasn't unconditional. It was entirely conditional on what I could do for them, on what I could provide. The laughter from the main table seemed to grow louder, more distant. The food on my plate suddenly tasted bland. I looked at Liam, still absorbed in his game, and then back at the vibrant, animated faces of my son and daughter-in-law. They didn't see me. They hadn't seen me in years. And in that moment, a quiet, profound question settled in my mind. If I stopped providing, would they still see me at all? The seed of doubt planted weeks ago had finally blossomed into a chilling certainty. My role in their lives wasn't about love. It was about convenience. The day of my 74th birthday dawned, bright and deceptively cheerful. I tried to push away the lingering bitterness from the Sunday lunch, to convince myself that today would be different. It was my day, after all. Jake and Karen had insisted on hosting a small gathering at my house, which usually meant I'd still do most of the work, but I'd hoped for a moment of genuine recognition. The house was filled with a buzz of activity by late afternoon. Sarah arrived early, a thoughtful bouquet of my favorite lilies in hand, and gave me a warm hug. "Happy birthday, Grandma. You look wonderful." Her sincerity always felt like a balm. Liam, my grandson, was already tearing around the living room, fueled by pre-party excitement. Jake and Karen were in the kitchen, ostensibly helping, though Karen mostly directed traffic while Jake fiddled with his phone. The cake, a store-bought vanilla creation Karen had picked up, sat on the counter, candles ready. The table was set with the good china, a rare sight. For a moment, a fragile sense of hope flickered within me. Maybe today they would truly see me. As guests started to arrive, a few distant cousins, some old friends of Thomas and mine, the house grew louder, music played softly, and the hum of conversation filled the air. I was circulating, accepting well wishes, trying to smile genuinely. Then Karen approached me, a bright, almost artificial smile plastered on her face. She held a small white device in her hand. "Helen, darling, can I have a quick word?" She steered me gently towards the quieter corner of the living room near the staircase. "Of course, Karen. Everything all right?" I asked, a faint tremor of unease starting in my stomach. She pressed the baby monitor into my hand. It was Liam's, the one he used when he slept over. "Listen, we were just thinking, it's going to be a bit loud downstairs with everyone here, and Liam's got school tomorrow. He's already getting a bit antsy. Would you mind terribly keeping an eye on him upstairs? It'll just be for a couple of hours until he falls asleep. You know how he loves a story from you." She gave my arm a squeeze, her smile unwavering. My heart plummeted. My own birthday, the one day I hoped to be celebrated, to be part of the main event. And here I was, being handed the baby monitor, a clear signal of my designated role, the unpaid babysitter, even on my own special day. The words caught in my throat. "Oh, I suppose not. Wonderful. You're the best, Helen. We'd be lost without you." She turned before I could say anything else, already heading back towards the cluster of guests, her laughter tinkling as she joined a conversation. I stood there, the warm plastic of the monitor a heavy weight in my palm. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all seemed to recede, as if I were underwater. I felt a wave of vulnerability wash over me, a chilling realization that this wasn't a request, but an expectation, a dismissal. As I started towards the stairs, I heard Jake's voice, lower now, almost a whisper, from the kitchen doorway. He was talking to Karen, his back to me. "Are you sure Mom's okay with that? I mean, it's her birthday." Karen's voice was dismissive. "Oh, she's fine. She loves Liam. Besides," her voice dropped even further, but I caught the tail end. "We really need to talk about that mortgage payment next month. Things are tighter than we thought. We can't afford to upset the apple cart, if you know what I mean." Jake mumbled something in agreement, and then their voices faded into the general din of the party. "Can't afford to upset the apple cart." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't about my love for Liam or my comfort. It was about their finances, my contributions, my role as their personal ATM. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step a deliberate act. Liam was already in his pajamas, bouncing on the bed in the guest room. "Grandma, are you going to read me a story?" he asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Yes, sweetie," I managed, my voice a little shaky. I tucked him in, picked up a well-worn copy of a fairy tale, and began to read. My voice was steady, but my mind was a whirlwind. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled sounds of celebration, of laughter, my celebration, without me. After Liam finally drifted off, his breathing soft and even, I tiptoed out of the room, leaving the baby monitor on the bedside table. I couldn't bear to hold it anymore. Instead of going back downstairs, I found myself drawn to Thomas's study. It was a room I rarely used anymore, filled with his old books, his worn leather armchair, the scent of pipe tobacco that still clung faintly to the air. I sank into his chair, the leather cool against my skin. The silence in the study was a stark contrast to the party below. I could still hear the faint thrum of the music, the occasional burst of laughter, a distant reminder of what I was missing, or rather, what they were actively ensuring I missed. The whispered conversation about the mortgage, about not upsetting the apple cart, played over and over in my mind. It wasn't just a casual request for babysitting. It was a calculated move. They needed me, not for my company, not for my presence, but for my resources. They were ensuring their financial safety net remained intact, even if it meant sidelining me on my own birthday. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, tightening with each passing minute. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was a deep, unsettling certainty, a sense of betrayal lurking just beneath the surface of their smiles and their casual, "Happy birthday, Helen." I felt it, a cold, creeping awareness that their love was a performance, and I was merely a prop in their carefully constructed financial play. I sat in Thomas's study, the silence a stark contrast to the muffled party sounds below. The knot in my stomach tightened with each passing minute. The betrayal I'd sensed earlier was no longer a whisper. It was a roar in my ears. I couldn't just sit there. Not anymore. Not on my own birthday. I pushed myself out of the armchair, my legs feeling a little wobbly, but my resolve hardening with every step. I walked out of the study, down the stairs, towards the bright lights and loud chatter of my own living room. When I reached the bottom, the sight that greeted me was exactly what I expected. Everyone was gathered around the dining table, where my birthday cake, still untouched, sat proudly. Karen was holding a knife, ready to cut the first slice. Jake had his arm around her, beaming. Sarah was there too, looking a little uncomfortable, but still part of the circle. They hadn't even waited for me. "Helen, there you are," Karen exclaimed, her voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful, as if I'd just popped out for a moment. "We were just about to cut the cake. Come on, make a wish." I walked towards them, my gaze fixed on Karen, then Jake. The smiles on their faces felt like a mockery. "You were just about to cut my cake," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady, though I could feel a tremor in my hands. Jake's smile faltered slightly. "Well, Mom, you were upstairs with Liam. We didn't want the ice cream to melt, and you couldn't have waited 5 minutes?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "On my birthday, after I cooked the entire meal, and then was asked to babysit my own grandson while you all celebrated down here." A hush fell over the room. The music, which had been a gentle background hum, suddenly felt too loud. Karen's cheerful facade cracked. Her eyes narrowed. "Helen, don't be dramatic. Liam needed you. And it's not like you had anything else important to do, is it? You're retired." The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. "Nothing important to do?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "It's my birthday, Karen. I had hoped to spend it with my family, not as an unpaid nanny." Jake stepped forward, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "Mom, come on. It's just a little thing. You're making a scene. We're all here to celebrate you." He gestured vaguely around. "Are you?" I challenged, my gaze sweeping over the faces, some curious, some uncomfortable. Or Are you here to ensure the apple cart isn't upset? The words slipped out before I could stop them, the bitterness of their earlier conversation still fresh. Karen's face flushed. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "I heard you, Karen. I heard you and Jake talking about the mortgage, about needing my contributions, about not upsetting the apple cart." My voice was gaining strength now, fueled by years of suppressed anger. "Is that all I am to you? A source of funds? A free babysitter?" Jake's face hardened. "Mom, that's not fair. We love you. We appreciate everything you do." His words sounded hollow, rehearsed. "Do you?" I pressed. "Because it feels like you only appreciate what I give. The money, the cooking, the childcare. But when it comes to my own needs, my own feelings, I'm just grandma. I'm someone who wouldn't understand modern topics. I'm someone who doesn't mind being relegated to the kids' table or being sent upstairs on her own birthday." Karen scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh, please, Helen, don't act like you're some kind of martyr. We all know you're just here for the family money. You love being the one who swoops in and saves the day, don't you? It makes you feel important." Her words were like daggers, each one twisting deeper. Jake, instead of defending me, just looked down at his shoes. His silence was louder than any accusation. "The family money?" I repeated, my voice trembling now, but with rage, not fear. "That's my money, Karen. Money I earned, money Thomas and I saved. Money I've poured into this family, into your lives, because I thought it was what a loving mother and grandmother did, because I thought it would earn me your respect, your affection." Karen rolled her eyes, a dismissive wave of her hand. "Honestly, Helen, you're being ridiculous. It's just a birthday. We're all busy. We have lives." She turned back to the cake, as if the conversation was over, as if I was no longer worth her attention. "Who wants cake?" she announced to the room, forcing a bright smile. The other guests, caught in the uncomfortable silence, mumbled polite responses. Sarah, however, looked horrified. She stared at Karen, then at Jake, her face pale. I stood there, watching Karen prepare to cut the cake, her back to me. My birthday cake. Untouched by me, as the family celebrated without me. The humiliation was a burning fire in my chest, but it was also a cleansing fire. Something inside me snapped. "I'm done," I said, my voice cutting through the forced cheer, clear and strong. Everyone turned to look at me. I'm done being the family doormat. I'm done being taken for granted. I'm done being invisible. I looked at Jake, my son, who still couldn't meet my gaze. Then at Karen, whose eyes were now wide with a mixture of shock and anger. "This isn't love," I continued, my voice unwavering. "This is exploitation, and I won't stand for it anymore." With that, I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving the untouched cake, the stunned faces, and the sudden heavy silence behind me. The front door clicked shut with a soft finality, a sound that marked not an ending, but a new, defiant beginning. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I walked for what felt like miles. The cool evening air, a sharp contrast to the burning humiliation in my chest. My legs ached, my head throbbed, but the anger was a potent fuel, propelling me forward. Eventually, the adrenaline began to wane, and the shock set in. I found myself on a park bench, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows. What had I done? Had I truly just walked out of my own birthday party after confronting my family like that? The answer, a quiet but firm voice in my head, was yes. And it felt liberating, terrifying, but liberating. I didn't go back to my house that night. Instead, I called Margot, my friend. Margot Ellis, 68, had been my confidant for decades, ever since our children were in elementary school. She lived alone now, too, after her husband passed, and understood the quiet loneliness that could creep in. She didn't ask many questions, just told me to come over. I spent the night on her sofa, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The next morning, the shock had settled into a dull ache, but the resolve remained. I went back to my house. The silence was deafening. No lingering party chatter, no signs of celebration. Just the untouched birthday cake, still on the dining table, a stark reminder of the previous night's confrontation. I walked past it into Thomas's study. The room, usually a sanctuary, now felt tainted by the recent memories of my family's betrayal. I sank into his old leather armchair, the one I'd sat in just hours before, listening to their whispered plans. Tears finally came, hot and stinging, for the years of sacrifice, for the love I'd given so freely, only to have it twisted into something transactional. I picked up an old photograph of Thomas, his smile warm and genuine. He would never have let this happen. He would have protected me. I spent the next few days in a haze, sorting through old mementos in the study. Letters, faded photographs, Thomas' old journals. Each item brought a fresh wave of grief, not just for him, but for the dreams we'd shared, dreams I'd put aside for my family. Then came the phone calls. First, Jake. Mom, what was that all about? Karen is furious. You really embarrassed us. No apology, no concern for my feelings, just anger at being exposed. I listened, my hand trembling, then simply said, I meant what I said, Jake, and hung up. Karen called next, her voice dripping with venom. Helen, you need to apologize to Jake and me. What you did was completely uncalled for. And don't think for a second that we're going to forget this. I didn't even bother to respond. I just ended the call. The following weekend, the phone rang again. It was Karen. Helen, darling, Liam has his soccer tournament on Saturday, and we both have to be there. Could you possibly watch him for the afternoon? Just for a few hours. Her voice was back to its saccharine sweetness, as if the previous week's explosion had never happened, as if my words meant nothing. A cold calm settled over me. This was it. This was the moment to assert myself. No, Karen, I said, my voice firm, unwavering. I can't. There was a stunned silence on the other end. What? You can't? But Liam needs you. I'm sorry, Karen. I have other plans. It was a lie, but it felt good to say it, to put myself first. Other plans? What other plans could you possibly have that are more important than your grandson? Her voice was rising, losing its sweetness. My plans are my own, Karen, and I won't be babysitting this weekend. I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding, but a strange sense of exhilaration bubbling up inside me. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the deafening silence of neglect, but the quiet hum of newfound power. That afternoon, I started going through my old bank statements, the ones I usually just filed away without much thought. I'd always been meticulous with finances, a habit Thomas had instilled in me. Page after page, I saw the transfers, the checks written, the credit card payments I'd covered, Jake's car repairs, Karen's new kitchen appliances, Liam's private school tuition, countless family vacations I'd contributed to, even the down payment on their first house. The numbers were staggering. Thousands upon thousands of dollars, freely given, no questions asked. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. I hadn't just been taken for granted. I had been systematically drained, manipulated. The clarity was sharp, painful, but also empowering. I wasn't just grandma. I was a significant financial resource, and they had treated me as such, not as a person. As I sat there, surrounded by stacks of financial documents, a knock came at the front door. I hesitated, thinking it might be Jake or Karen. But then I remembered. I hadn't seen my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, in weeks. She was a sweet woman, a few years older than me, who lived across the street. I opened the door cautiously. "Helen, dear, I saw you walking the other night. Looked like you were in a bit of a state," she said, her eyes kind and concerned. "And I haven't seen you out much since. Everything all right? I was just making a fresh pot of coffee. Thought you might like to join me." Her simple act of kindness, her genuine concern, brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Henderson," I started, my voice cracking. She put a gentle hand on my arm. "Come on over, Helen. Sometimes a good cup of coffee and a listening ear are just what the doctor ordered." And so I found myself sitting in Mrs. Henderson's cozy kitchen, sipping coffee, and for the first time, truly talking about it all to someone who saw me, not just my role, not just my money. Her quiet understanding, her simple validation helped me see my worth outside the narrow confines my family had placed me in. The anger was still there, but now it was tempered with a growing sense of purpose. I wasn't just done being a doormat. I was ready to reclaim my life. Mrs. Henderson's kindness had been a turning point. Her simple act of listening, of seeing me, had solidified the resolve that had been building since my birthday. I spent the next few days in a flurry of activity, not with cooking or cleaning for others, but with gathering my own affairs. The stack of bank statements and financial records I'd unearthed in Thomas's study became my new focus. The sheer volume of money I'd given away over the years was staggering. It wasn't just the big things, the down payment on Jake and Karen's house, Liam's tuition, the car repairs. It was the constant stream of smaller contributions, utility bills, groceries, clothes, school trips, family vacations that I'd always contributed to, which often meant I paid for the bulk of it. I meticulously listed each instance, creating a ledger of my generosity and their dependence. I knew I needed professional advice. I couldn't just cut them off without understanding the full scope of my own financial situation. I remembered a financial advisor Thomas had used years ago, a kind woman named Ms. Davies. I found her contact information in an old address book and made an appointment. Walking into Ms. Davies's office felt like stepping into a different world. The reception area was quiet, tastefully decorated, and the receptionist greeted me with a warm, respectful smile. When Ms. Davies, a woman in her late 50s with intelligent, kind eyes, came out to meet me, she shook my hand firmly. "Helen, it's a pleasure to see you again," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Please come in." I sat across from her, a thick folder of my financial documents clutched in my hands. I started by explaining, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, the situation with my family. I laid out the ledger I'd created, detailing the years of financial support. Ms. Davies listened patiently, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. Helen, it sounds like you've been incredibly generous to your own detriment. Let's take a look at your assets. She went through my portfolio, explaining everything in clear, simple terms. My late husband, Thomas, had been a smart man. He had set up several investments, a substantial retirement fund, and a life insurance policy that had paid out well. He had also, crucially, ensured that the family home was solely in my name, a detail I'd vaguely known but never fully appreciated. There was also a trust document which Ms. Davies pulled up on her computer. This trust was established by Thomas shortly before his passing, she explained. It designates you as the sole beneficiary and trustee of a significant portion of his assets, with very clear stipulations about how those funds are to be managed and distributed, or not distributed, at your discretion. It was designed to provide for your comfort and security throughout your life, Helen, and to protect you from any undue influence. My eyes widened. So, the house, the investments, they're all mine, legally. Absolutely, Helen. Everything Thomas left you is legally yours, and this trust gives you complete control over those specific funds. No one else has a claim to them unless you choose to grant it. It was a very wise move on Thomas's part. He clearly wanted to ensure your financial independence. A wave of emotion washed over me. Thomas, even in death, had been looking out for me. He had seen something, perhaps, that I had been too blind to see for years. He had anticipated this. The realization was a powerful mix of grief for him and a fierce surge of empowerment for myself. Ms. Davies continued, showing me projections, explaining the various options I had. You have more than enough to live very comfortably, Helen, to travel, to pursue hobbies, to truly enjoy your retirement without any financial worries. You don't need to rely on anyone, and frankly, no one has any legal right to demand anything from you. She treated me with such respect, such kindness. It was a stark contrast to the dismissive remarks, the casual exploitation I'd grown accustomed to from Jake and Karen. Here, I was Helen, a woman with significant assets and the intelligence to manage them, not just Grandma, who wouldn't understand. I spent nearly 2 hours in her office, absorbing every detail. When I left, my head was spinning, but for the first time in years, it wasn't with anxiety or hurt. It was with a renewed sense of purpose. I walked out with a clear understanding of my financial power, armed with the knowledge that I had options, rights, and a legacy that was truly mine. Back home, I went straight back to Thomas's study. I pulled out the old trust document, the one Miss Davies had mentioned, from a locked drawer in his desk. It was tucked away behind some old tax returns. Reading the legal jargon, now with Miss Davies' explanation fresh in my mind, I saw it clearly. My name, sole beneficiary, full control. I looked at the ledger I'd created, the staggering sum of money I'd given away. And then I looked at the trust document, a beacon of my true independence. The anger was still there, a simmering ember, but it was now fueled by a powerful, undeniable sense of self-worth. I wasn't just collecting evidence of their dependence. I was collecting the pieces of my own shattered dignity, ready to put them back together, stronger than before, armed with the knowledge from Ms. Davies and the clarity of Thomas's trust document, I felt a strength I hadn't known in years. The quiet hum of power I'd felt after refusing Karen's babysitting request had now amplified into a steady, resonant thrum. The time for subtle acts of independence was over. It was time for decisive action. My first step was practical. The joint bank account I still shared with Jake for certain household expenses, a relic from years ago that had morphed into a convenient way for him to access my funds, was closed. I opened new individual accounts, transferring all my accessible funds. Then, with Ms. Davies's guidance, I began the process of establishing a personal trust fund, mirroring Thomas's foresight, but this time it was for my future, safeguarding my assets and ensuring my financial independence. This would take a few weeks to finalize, but the wheels were in motion. Next, I updated my will. It had been years since I'd looked at it, and the previous version, drafted in a different lifetime, had been overly generous to Jake and Karen, reflecting my earlier belief in investing in their future. Now, with a clear head and a hardened heart, I restructured it entirely. My daughter overseas, who had always maintained a respectful distance and never asked for financial favors, would receive a substantial portion. My granddaughter Sarah, who had shown me genuine affection and concern, would also be provided for. Liam, my grandson, would have a smaller, protected fund for his education, managed by an independent trustee, ensuring it couldn't be siphoned off by his parents. Jake and Karen, however, would receive nothing beyond a nominal sum, a stark reflection of their actions. The phone call started almost immediately after the first bank transfers went through. Jake called first, his voice laced with confusion, then irritation. "Mom, what's going on with the joint account? My direct deposit for the utilities bounced. Did you close it?" "Yes, Jake, I did," I replied, my voice calm. "What? Why? That's ridiculous. How are we supposed to pay for things?" "That's your responsibility, Jake, not mine anymore." He sputtered, clearly blindsided. "But Mom, I always covered for you," I finished for him. "That's over. You're 50 years old, Jake. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. I hung up before he could argue further. Karen's call was predictably more aggressive. "Helen, what in God's name are you doing? Jake just told me you closed the account, and Liam's tuition payment is due next week. Are you trying to ruin us?" "Karen, Liam's tuition is your and Jake's responsibility, not mine," I stated, my voice unwavering. "My financial support for you both has ended." "Ended? What do you mean ended? You can't just do that. We're family. You promised to help us." Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. "I promised to help, yes. But I never promised to be your personal ATM indefinitely. You have taken advantage of my generosity for too long. I'm done being used. You will not use me anymore." "This is blackmail. You're punishing us because of your little birthday tantrum." "No, Karen. This is me reclaiming my life and my resources. You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences." I hung up, my hand shaking slightly, but my resolve firm. The panic in her voice was palpable, and for the first time, I felt a sense of control, not guilt. The confrontation wasn't just over the phone. A few days later, Jake and Karen showed up at my house, unannounced, their faces grim. Liam was with them, looking confused. "Mom, we need to talk about this properly," Jake began, trying to sound reasonable, but his eyes were hard. "You can't just cut us off like this. We're in a difficult spot." A difficult spot you created for yourselves, I countered, standing my ground in the doorway. By relying on me instead of managing your own finances, by taking my generosity for granted. Karen stepped forward, her voice low and menacing. Helen, if you think you can just walk away from your responsibilities to your family, you're sorely mistaken. We know about your money. We know Thomas left you a lot. We have rights. No, Karen, you don't, I said, looking her directly in the eye. Thomas's assets and mine are legally protected. I've consulted with a financial advisor and updated my will. You have no claim on my funds, zero, and if you continue to harass me, I will consider it elder abuse and take legal action. The word legal action seemed to hit them. Jake's jaw dropped. Karen's face went from angry red to a pale white. They exchanged a panicked glance. The realization that their financial safety net, their endless well of my money, was not just shrinking, but disappearing entirely, was finally sinking in. The entitlement they'd worn like a second skin was now being stripped away, revealing the raw fear beneath. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said, my voice unwavering, I have plans. I closed the door softly but firmly, leaving them standing on my porch, stunned and silent. The silence was no longer heavy with betrayal, but with the quiet, dignified triumph of a woman who had finally found her voice and her power. The weeks that followed my confrontation with Jake and Karen were a whirlwind of activity, but this time, it was all for me. The process of establishing my trust fund and finalizing my updated will was completed with Ms. Davies's efficient help. The house, the one Thomas and I had built our lives in, now felt too large, too full of ghosts and bitter memories. It was time for a change. I found a lovely apartment in a vibrant part of town, not far from the park where I'd first started to process everything. It was smaller, cozier, filled with natural light, and had a balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. I sold the house, a decision that caused another flurry of angry phone calls from Jake and Karen, who seemed to believe they had some inherent right to it. I ignored them. The sale meant I had even more financial freedom, more capital to invest in my own future. Moving into the apartment was a joy. I carefully selected which pieces of furniture and mementos to bring, choosing only those that brought me comfort and happy memories of Thomas, not those tainted by recent events. My new living room was filled with books, vibrant green plants, and the soft scent of the lilies Sarah had given me on my birthday, now dried and preserved. It reflected me, not the expectations of my family. Life began to unfold in new and unexpected ways. Margot, my friend, was a constant source of support. We started taking long walks together, exploring the local botanical gardens, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. She introduced me to a book club at the community center, where I met other women my age, vibrant and engaged, who shared stories and laughter, and never once asked me to babysit or pay for dinner. We talked about current events, about books, about our own lives and dreams. It was a refreshing change from being dismissed as someone who wouldn't understand. My phone still rang occasionally with calls from Jake and Karen, but they were different now. There was no longer the casual expectation, the demand for money. Instead, there was a strained politeness, sometimes a hint of desperation. I heard through the grapevine from a mutual acquaintance that they were struggling. Jake had taken on extra shifts, and Karen had started working part-time. They had to sell one of their cars to cover expenses. Liam's private school tuition had become a real burden, and he was now attending the local public school. It was hard at first not to feel a pang of guilt. They were my son and daughter-in-law, after all. But then I remembered Karen's cruel words. "We all know you're just here for the family money." And Jake's silence. The memory solidified my resolve. They were facing the consequences of their own choices, their own entitlement. It wasn't my responsibility to rescue them from a situation they had created by exploiting my generosity. Sarah, however, remained a bright spot. She visited often, always bringing a small treat or a new book for me. She was genuinely happy for me, for my newfound independence. "Grandma, you look lighter," she told me one afternoon as we sat on my balcony, sipping tea. "Like a weight has been lifted." "It has, my dear," I replied, a genuine smile on my face. "A very heavy weight." She told me about her own struggles with her parents, how she tried to talk to them, but they just didn't seem to understand. "They still think you're being unreasonable," she admitted, looking down at her teacup. "But I don't. I think you finally put yourself first, and it's about time." Her words were a balm, a confirmation that not all my family was lost to entitlement. One quiet evening, a few months after moving into my new apartment, I sat on my balcony, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees below. The city hummed softly around me, a comforting backdrop to my newfound peace. I held a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth seeping into my hands. I thought about the past year, my 74th birthday, the baby monitor, the cruel words, the discovery of Thomas's trust, the confrontations, the move. It had been a tumultuous journey, filled with pain and anger, but also with incredible growth. I had reclaimed my dignity, my self-worth, and my financial independence. I was no longer the family doormat, the just grandma who didn't mind. I was Helen, a woman who had finally learned to put herself first, to value her own needs and dreams. The strained relationships with Jake and Karen were an immediate consequence, a void left by my absence, but it was a void they had created, not me. And in its place, I had found something far more valuable: true peace, genuine connection with those who valued me for who I was, and the quiet satisfaction of a life finally lived on my own terms. A serene smile touched my lips as I took a slow sip of tea, embracing the quiet dignity of my newfound freedom. The world, once a place of obligation, now felt full of possibility.